Welcome to Talk Cosmos, the show where Sue Minahan and her panel of guests bring you leading-edge astrology conversations through a journey of soul growth patterns connecting astrology's energetic cycles. Get ready to understand your path in the cosmic roots of the stars.
Hello and hi, this is Sue Minahan, founder of Talk Cosmos, Insightful Conversations, Awakening Your Consciousness. And that is exactly the focus for today, which is May 7th, because in a week, Jupiter, the largest planet in our solar system, is going to revisit its cycle in Taurus. It has a 12-year cycle that repeats back to the same sign and will last for a year. And it's a time that we can manifest dreams aligned to our values, purpose, and meaning. So we are ready now for Planet Buzz.
Focusing on planetary ecliptic orbital cycles and planetary pairs called synodic cycles connecting the planets at the same degree that begin our relationship, these are the members of Planet Buzz.
I'm Sue Minahan, the founder of Talk Cosmos, an eclectic evolutionary astrologer, consultant, certified color energy life coach, vice president of the Washington State Astrological Association, member of Kepler Astrology Toastmaster Club, of a Dwarf Planet University diploma and AA with music degree. I love mythology, philosophizing, collaboration. I'm an artist, writer, a perpetual student of life.
And I'm Dr. Laura Todd. I work as a spiritually oriented psychological astrologer with students and clients around the world. As a counselor, writer, and educator, I love helping people recognize their inner strength, take advantage of auspicious moments, and navigate times of challenge with greater ease. On my own podcast, Mythic Sky Storytime, I discuss astrology, mythology, and actualizing our full potential. Holding a PhD in human science, my doctoral thesis, titled Guided by Celestial Light in a World of Artificial Illumination, explores the lived experience of contemporary Western astrologers. In addition to my astrological work, I have a course in personal mythology that explores the stories we carry from our ancestors and the impact those narratives have on our lives.
And as the ancient Hermetic Code reveals,
as below, so above. As above, so below.
Hi, Laura, Dr. Tad. It's so good to see you. And
Yes, it's great to be back.
yes, here I'm going to start right off because on our slides here we have, why isn't it doing? Oh, yes, there we are. To connect with Laura, her website is Mythic Sky, rather. And if you want to check on the slides, it will give a better bio of who we are. And we are talking about Jupiter, the big conscious expansion energy.
Yeah, the father of the, well, he's the biggest planet in the solar system, right? And archetypally, Jupiter's Zeus in the Greek pantheon, right? So this
Yes.
large leadership or in charge, but maybe egoic, particularly in the Zeus manifestation of Jupiter, planet, right? This larger than life presence, right? That's part of Jupiter being the largest planet that we know of in our solar system. Is that huge presence and the impact, right, from an astronomical perspective, from a gravitational perspective, the impact that Jupiter has on everything around it. And so it's a big presence, it's a big impact, even though it's not, astrologically, we look at the personal planets, it's also that shift astrologically, right? We talk about the sun and moon and Mercury and Venus and Mars being the personal planets, and Jupiter's the beginning of that shift, right? Where Jupiter and Saturn are often referred to as the social planets.
Yes,
because they're not generational, like Pluto, that's in a sign for a decade sometimes or longer. but it's in a sign for a year typically. So all the way through the zodiac in 12 years. And so we look at Jupiter as the beginning of that transition from the personal astrology to the social astrology, that it's our interaction with the world around us in a way that the personal planets are more internal than we begin to see with Jupiter.
Because very wonderful. We have interactions, and it's based on what do we value, and particularly in Taurus here, with Taurus's idea of the archetype of our bringing spirit into matter. It's where we find what we value in life to have our resources to use for the purpose of living, for life. Whether it's art, music, in these dynamics, and it's in our senses with a body, matter, its form, its earth sign. It's a very grounded energy. But yet here we are with Zeus, the consciousness of our visions, isn't it right? What's beyond, whether it's higher education or whether it's other cultures. Well, this is more Sagittarius, but it's still.
Well, but they have a relationship, right? Jupiter is associated with Sag. And part of that expansiveness or that Taurian energy too, right? As he's moving into Taurus, of the earth signs, I always feel like Taurus is the most earth in terms of elementally in the real, like tangible world, not astrological elements, but the ground, the earth, engaging with the natural world. Taurus is the most associated with the natural world of the earth signs. I often talk to clients with moon in Taurus and say, like, you literally need hands in the dirt. Like, for them to feel emotionally grounded, go garden, like hands in the dirt, walk barefoot, engage with the element. And that helps people with Taurus moons find emotional grounding, because they need to engage with the earth in a way that it's good for all of us, but sometimes others need it more. And so this, it also governs the sensory experience, right? All of the senses,
It's
tactile
our language.
Experience.
Yes.
The tactile experience of the world is very Taurian. And so with Jupiter ingressing in a few weeks, that will, there's going to be an amplification of that, particularly because it's Jupiter, because Jupiter expands everything it comes in contact with. That this greater attention, consciously or unconsciously, being put on this, our sensory experience of the world.
For any of us that have strong planets strongly in Taurus, you and I were talking about how pivotal these, when I say this particular cycle of when Jupiter is in Taurus, how significant it is. It's really turning points. And really, and I think also it must relate in part to this body sensory part of working with the world. It's a language. Our body's a language, and it doesn't say hello. It says hello, but it does it in various through smell, through taste, through sight, and through how you feel your whole body. I know I have Mars in Taurus, and I think you're saying you have South Node,
Chiron, and Jupiter.
Aha, you have Jupiter. That's right.
But I think too, I think some of that with Jupiter, regardless of sign, is that it's one of the few planets where we can really track the cycles in a different way, because it's like, well, looking at the Venus cycle, well, Venus is going to be in the same place roughly every year. So tracking what she's representing for you individually isn't as obvious because it's happening every single year. Or even Mars, it's like, oh, well, it's every other year. It's not necessarily as the shift or the demarcation of the transition isn't necessarily as clear. But when we get to Jupiter, it's a 12-year cycle. It hasn't happened for a little over a decade. And yet we experience, 6 of them, 7 of them in a lifetime. 6 maybe, right? I mean, 5 cycles is a 60-year cycle, right? So if you live into your 70s or 80s, you're dealing with 6 or 7 cycles of this. And so you can really start to unpack patterns in a way that I was saying, like, well, the moon's in the same place every month. It's not going to necessarily be as sort of shining a light on the personal pattern that's showing up. And we get that a little bit with Saturn, but not as much so, right? It's like if we live into our 90s, we get 3. It's not as clearly evident of the repeated pattern that we can see with Jupiter. And so that is one of the things that I think could be really helpful for individuals who are trying to understand, well, what might this transit mean for me personally, is when you can just look at the dates, and regardless, you don't even need to know your chart. You can look at the dates that we've got a slide for and just say, oh, well, what was happening in these periods of time repeatedly? And could even do some forecasting for yourself, saying, oh, well, every time Jupiter has been here, this has happened. Here's a repeated theme, and that it's likely some version of that to show up in this next year.
Yes, and the last time was in 2011 to June 2012, but it systematically goes back. I'll read it. It was in 1999, 2000, then it was 1988 to 89, 76 to 77, 64 to 65, just when Uranus and Pluto were conjuncting, 52 to 53, and then back at 40, 41, which is interestingly is right when, which we'll be talking about ahead, when Uranus conjuncts with Jupiter, both in Taurus, which it will next year. But these dates, just on an immediate, go ahead, basis.
Yeah. So just that's what I'm saying. It's like, so we can all sort of look at these dates, and for those periods that we were incarnated, go, okay, what was happening during that period? What was happening during that period? And what themes might jump off the page, right? Like, yes, I know that I have a Jupiter in Taurus, and so does my sister. And I don't know necessarily off the top of my head if they're conjunct, but I know when she was born. And so I know I can see, oh, there's a theme of the impact of having multiple siblings, but she was finally the first girl. I finally had a sister. I had 2 little brothers. There was finally another girl. Right? Like the
of similar consciousness, probably of similar consciousness. Here she has this large planet of in Jupiter that really does give Zeus is consciousness. I mean, it is this. Help me on this. I'm trying to explain, but that it's our philosophy, Sagittarius, and that it's our philosophy, it's our culture, it's how we put
all those
patterns
big ideas
that you're putting together,
right?
Belief
big ideas,
pattern.
Big concepts that we associate with Sagittarius. And that even I remember years ago talking to some other astrologers about psychology falling in the domain of Sag and Jupiter, and that it's the study of psychology that would fall in that domain. Psychological processing work, that's 8th house Scorpio for sure, right? Because you're unpacking things that are hidden and unearthing stuff. That's Scorpionic. But the theory, psychological theory, would fall in the Jupiter Sag domain.
Yeah, I've been
right.
fascinated.
The intellectual, the analysis part of it is much more Sagittarian Jupiter, right? What's the big picture? Let me understand. And in some ways, like, what are the themes?
The patterns, as you were saying.
What are the patterns? What are the themes that are
threads
showing up? Even like we're talking about, oh, we can track these themes. Jupiter itself could even be representative of the existence of them, right? And that's even part of the mythology, is the repeated pattern that Jupiter plays out, right? His father, Saturn, or Kronos and Zeus in the Greek myths, right? Uranus, it's predicted that for Uranus, that his son will usurp him. Saturn usurps his father. It's predicted for Saturn that his son will usurp him. And that's what transpires with Zeus, right? There's, again, this like repeated pattern of the new generation coming in, overtaking the previous. So even in the mythology, we see repeated patterns of the new coming in and transforming and creating a new pattern or a new thing going forward.
Yes. And just to clarify a little bit for those people that perhaps are not as focused on all this mythology, which you and I share so much, but Uranus, the sky god, is chaos, rampant, just birthing life with Gaia, the nature of life. And then Saturn, that we represent time, that humans use a lot. The earth spins day and night. We go around, we have the seasons, but we live in a time-oriented world. Usurped that power and had very regulated time, order, from chaos, order. But then Zeus, and perhaps we'll be talking about this more in our next talk, won't we be? But at any rate, Zeus comes along and says, hey, we're going to individuate that. I'm going to make my own choices, thank you, on my own belief patterns, and good or bad, and live the consequences and learn about how to connect. So that's where we're at, in a sense. I mean, I'm seeing this as the backbone, but it's right. What goes around comes around. I'm beginning to go out there on a tangent, maybe from our central focus, but that, yes.
Well, just that there's the repeated theme. I mean, the whole reason that Athena is born from his head is fear that he will be usurped by his children. He swallows Meta, who's Athena's mother, and then Athena is born from his head. There's this repeated pattern of the child usurping the parent, right? And that's part, and I just was bringing it in because if we're talking about these very clear patterns that Jupiter illuminates for us, even the mythology shows these repeated patterns. And so there's something about Jupiter, I think, as an archetype that is about looking for the patterns, looking for where are there the consistency in the growth, right? That, like, what's the peeling of the onion that is happening with these cycles, that even though there's themes, ideally we've grown some since the last time Jupiter was in Taurus. And so even if thematically the same thing shows up, it won't be identical.
No.
Because we've done work and you can't step in the same river twice. Right. And so even if you're in the same part of the river has changed. And so looking, that there'll be thematically things happen, but if this period of time is really challenging for you, it doesn't mean that it's going to be awful again. It may be that the growth that came out of that there's similar opportunities for growth. Yes.
Do we want to share a little bit about some of the patterns that went on, or shall we go to the next? I'm just thinking, what do we have here? We have the chart for this event happening, which is on the 16th of May, in 1 week, and it will be from Universal Time, which is also Greenwich Mean Time here at this time of the year. In London or Greenwich, it would be in the evening at 5:19. That's 5 o'clock, 19 minutes and 50 seconds p.m. So it has, on a global basis, this chart that if we look at a chart, we look where are we collectively, consciously focused. And interestingly, the angle of entry for the ascendant is right close to our south node energy in Scorpio, 0 degrees actually, which means it signifies a certain releasing of personally feeling. How are we releasing this, the change? Scorpio is ruled by 2 rulers, but the modern ruler is Pluto, which
yeah, well, and I think too, because it's the south node, it's what are we letting go of the past to move forward, and then the concretizing, which is so earthy, right? It's like, so the release of the old, letting go of the old, and then cultivating, building, manifesting something new, which is that north node in Taurus, that'll be happening simultaneously. And so this, what are you going to replace with what you let go of? It's oftentimes we need to let go. We need to shed what's no longer serving us. Okay, but now what are you going to do? What are you going to replace it with? How are you going to move forward? And in some ways, I think that Jupiter conjunction may really help us to get clarity on that.
Later,
like
you mean
Jupiter in that conjunction? Jupiter conjunct the north node as it ingresses into Taurus.
It is. And it is. For those folks that are looking on the chart where it is, that's over on the very right-hand side as we're facing it, as we call the descendant, going into the 7th area of other people. And it looks like a little, like a 4. Jupiter's like a 4, 0 degrees. Taurus.
And I think maybe part of that, with that being in the world chart, is what we're going to create, what we're going to replace what we let go of with, can't be done by ourselves. I think that's part of the 7th house piece of it, is the other. How are we going to co-create? What are we going to co-create to replace what we're letting go of?
And also the idea that if we're letting go in that scorpionic sense that we've been going through, the nodes last for 18 months, they're going to be leaving, we're at the tail end of it. But that's where we share our resources and exchange our resources, not like bartering, but in a sense, it's like I have goods, you have goods, we have perhaps, it's very deep relationships, whether it's marriage or business or however, but we get life source through those exchanges. But here, Jupiter is perhaps really saying, what do you individually own as your own resources, and what one-to-one relationships are really in your best service? Let's release those that are not really in your best interest to build this life, because in Taurus, the strength of life is so strong. It's survival. It wants to.
Yeah.
grow.
And I think there may be a piece of this, so in pulling in the Plutonian part, because Pluto's squaring this ingress.
Yes,
right?
it's intention. Let's get some action.
And so I think, looking at the world chart with Pluto being in the 3rd for this ingress, then there's a bit of sort of like transforming the story that we tell, right? With the 3rd house governing communication, right? So how are we changing the narrative? And it doesn't mean that it's non-truth, and maybe what we've been saying is true, but maybe there's a need. It's sort of like a choose your own adventure. It's like making a different choice.
Oh,
right?
You're talking my language.
Changing the narrative. Where do you want to go, as opposed to that samskara rut of the skipping record that isn't untrue. It's just maybe no longer supportive. And so what is the new story to tell, so that you can go into that expansive energy that is Jupiter, that allows, they say, I remember years ago, one of my first astrology teachers talked about, she said, there's no such thing as a bad Jupiter transit. The only caveat to that is taking on too much too fast, overindulgence.
Yes.
And that's definitely a vulnerability with it in Taurus, is the excess, because it governs the sensory experience, the excess excess food, excess alcohol, right? Not from a addiction issue, but in that it's also enjoyable.
Pleasure, exactly.
Right. An
That's
excess of pleasure to the point that it's detrimental. And that, that doing things that are pleasurable are great, but moderation is important. And for our well-being, right? I've joked with people, I was like, with that idea of like, no such thing as a bad Jupiter transit. Jupiter conjunct the sun, for people who are suns in Taurus, I have seen repeatedly with clients, Jupiter transiting the sun can lead to weight gain because it's an expansion of self, and that can be physical.
Yeah, well, taste does, yes. What
Right?
I
So
really
being
love about
mindful
this,
of that.
well, Laura, I love how you're focusing on the story, whether we want to take that narrative as a new adventure or that. I remember back on the equinox, because I have this additional panel with vibrational astrology with Linda Berry and Richard Smoot. And the theme there is our interconnective stories. Back at the solstice, it was our story. Now it's the interconnected stories, which is a very fascinating focus, but very true. And here you're bringing this up with the changing of the sign of Taurus, and because of its position on the global terms. I'm just to bring people back to how I'm looking at this. So it's totally significance, because if we're having adventures, how are we sharing them? Who do we want to share them with? And gaining that new relationship. It's very exciting as we go ahead. Well, we have almost now time to break away. If you have a last thought, and then we'll come back.
I think, why don't we come off? I'll bring it up when we get back from the breaks so we don't get too far down the road.
Okay, we'll tie this together further. We have new adventures in store for you. And this is Talk Cosmos, May 7th with Planet Buzz. I'm with Dr. Laura Tad. Thank you. We'll be right back. While we take a break from this week's edition of Talk Cosmos, let's take a look at this cycle's archetype. We're currently in the period of Taurus. By leaving a cycle based upon initiation, the energy of Taurus integrates spirit into a solid form of matter that is tangible and physical. It's an earth sign, concerned with self-sufficiency and the values to maintain the strength of a life form throughout its survival.
This is Martha Norwalk. Every Sunday morning, beginning at 9 a.m., thanks in part to NewProSupplements.com, we cover the world of animals. This week, it's Beth. Animal World, Sunday morning, 9 a.m. to noon, right here on Alternative Talk, AM 1150.
Talk Cosmos brings you leading-edge astrological conversations with hour-long programs each week on KKNW. The show goes live every Sunday from 1 to 2 p.m. Pacific. Talk Cosmos weekly programs are also available to watch live on Facebook and YouTube, along with daily chats throughout the week on the Talk Cosmos YouTube channel. While you're there, make sure you click like and subscribe buttons so you can get the full Talk Cosmos experience. Or, if you'd rather listen to the show archives with audio only, the entire podcast collection since 2018 is available on most podcast carriers. So, grab your coffee, tea, or kombucha and enjoy the show.
Alternative Talk 1150, local talk for the body, mind, and soul.
Hello, we're back again, and I want to ask you, and I hadn't before, do you have anything coming up as an event or special?
Not that is locked in for dates yet. So there's stuff in the works. I helped run a retreat in Nicaragua back in February and beginning of March. So that will be happening again, similar time next year. I don't have the exact dates yet. And I'm headed to Ireland to do some scouting to run a retreat in Ireland next summer. So I'll be doing some scouting when I'm in Ireland.
Oh boy, but we
to
will
come up
find
with
out.
a retreat for Ireland for next year.
The Emerald Isle. Oh my goodness. Beautiful. All right. Well, then we will return here to our slides. Thank you very much, Nathan, our great support. Now we have here, this is the world chart. Let's move. And as I said, May 16th is when Jupiter ingresses, and that's astrology language, into Taurus for its year cycle. It'll be from May 16th this year until May 25th of next year. So actually,
Yeah, I mean, it's almost exactly a year this time around. It's pretty remarkable.
It is. Now here, here we have for the United States. Yes, thank you. The same chart, but it will be at 1 in the afternoon, 1:19 and 49 seconds.
Well, and it's interesting because even though for folks who are watching the video, everything is pivoted backwards from the UK, that we're still seeing this communication theme, because now instead of the Scorpionic ascendant that then led us to Pluto, we still have the Pluto square going on, but we're now dealing with the Virgo rising, which means Mercury becomes the ruler of the chart and is the dominant sort of overarching layer of all of this. And so we still get this theme around communication showing up, even though it's in a different house and we're dealing with a different archetypal planet, and that planet's in a different sign. That this theme around communication is holding true even in a different part of the world.
And perhaps really emphasized because it is in the 9th house. The 9th house, which archetypally is about the law, the higher education, other cultures, visions of not visions. It is out above, higher mind. So a philosophy, that's what I'm trying to say. Belief patterns, huge, like with Sagittarius. And the sun is so close to the top. So we're really thinking of our identity. There's a lot in this chart. And who's the mastery of...
Yeah, well, and thinking, so with the sun very close to the midheaven, and the transmedium Edgar Casey talked about how, for him, the most important planet in a chart was the one closest to the midheaven. So, for natally, that can be anything for all of us, right? For me, it's Pluto. So for this chart, we're dealing with it the closest, and regardless of what side of the midheaven that it falls on, it's simply the planet closest
for me,
to the midheaven.
It's Venus and Uranus exactly conjunct. So it's like, speaking of the dreams and archetypes.
And the midheaven being, how are we presenting ourselves to the world? What are we going out? How does the world perceive us, right? And so if we're looking at this from a mundane level, but this is the US chart, it's like, so how the values of the US are seen, or how we are seen in relation to what we espouse to be our values as a nation. If we're looking at this as the US chart because it's cast for DC, that may be part of this. Even though everything will keep moving, this ingress, it's like a birth chart, right? And so it's this moment of the ingress. Okay, so this cycle, this year of May to May, this will be the themes we may be seeing throughout the year, even though everything will continue to move.
Like a seed point. Yes, indeed. Like a seed point. And to tie in what you had said earlier about however it is, our personal charts. Like for me, it will be in my 8th house. So I will be personally working for a cult and for my resources, expanding them, I suppose, with other people, but on a sort of personal basis, which does make sense. And so, for different, just to tie in, here it is for the nation where we're focused with our ideals of philosophies and belief patterns, which we're constantly working on.
But then for those of you who know your own charts, that will be where you start seeing the themes, right? That the ingress will occur in my fifth, even though, and so one of the themes that shows up for me with Jupiter is the birth of children that are significant people in my life. And it's even though that's not where my natal Jupiter is, the themes are often, it's my sister and really important friends' children are the 2000 and the 2011 and the 89 was the birth of my sister. So these kids showing up in my world that are really significant people is one of the themes in my pattern, right? So people know their own charts, seeing, that the themes that show up will likely have something to do with the archetypes of the house and maybe the ruler, and where your Venus is, given that we're looking at Taurus.
Here are those years again, since this relates exactly to what we're talking about. It is so true because when I look at my own themes, as it is in the 8th house, and it is approaching that, just to tie in how a person might look at their own chart, it's tying into my Mars, which is in Taurus in the 8th. It really has definite new actions. I totally transformed many of my deepest relationships that are pivotal to my survival in these years. So it is a yes. Well, moving ahead, let's see, where are we? Oh, I think you'd brought up, and here we have a chart that, let's see, is that the right chart?
The next one. That's the ingress.
Okay.
This is the old one. Okay. So
yeah, but this is when Jupiter and Uranus, which Uranus is in Taurus right now, and they make that conjunction every 83. Although the cycle is 84, I was adding it up. It's 83, 84 years that they connect. Well, this was the last one.
So they will connect at the end of this current cycle. And maybe we've got that chart later. But so the last
I can do it. All right, maybe we should jump to that. Here are the cycles, if this is, and I do have the next one. If you'd rather do that one next, this is fine. Because it was, just for those folks, every 83 years, they do connect. And the last one was 1941. Then prior to that was 1858. Now, moving ahead, it'll be next year, 2024.
Well, and it's interesting to me that they do keep lining up because mathematically, they wouldn't necessarily. Right? And so Jupiter, right? Like Uranus isn't in a sign for 12 years.
No, it takes not at all.
But Jupiter has a 12-year cycle,
years.
Right? So, right. So it takes.
I don't know if I caught that, but go ahead, Laura. I mean, isn't Jupiter's always every 12 years in Taurus? No,
it is, but Uranus isn't.
No, not at all. Exactly. No.
Yeah. So I'm saying, like, it wouldn't necessarily be true with other signs. But so what I was curious about, because we've all been living with this Uranus in Taurus since 2018, I think is when Uranus got into.
Well, it has a 7-8 year cycle, and it gets out in. All of a sudden with all the cycles, I'm getting a little lost myself.
Right, but so my point being, Uranus has been there for a while, right?
True.
We've been dealing with this upheaval of Uranus in Taurus, of the expect the unexpected, with around all these Taurian things we've been talking about, and values and security and all of that. That's been it was the
I think it was
rise and fall.
2016.
Oh, yeah.
2016 to 226, I think, is its cycle. Go ahead.
And so, part of Uranus and Taurus may have something to do with like rise and fall of cryptocurrency, right? But I was curious. I was just playing with the chart, looking at this Jupiter ingress, that then its conjunction to Uranus, which is only a few days before it gets out of Taurus, before Jupiter gets out of Taurus. Or like a month, right?
Yes, that's right. Because
like
it'll be May 25th, I think. Yes, the following month, and 1 month later,
1 month later, it's gone.
Yes, that's right.
And so it's really interesting, that they happen to line up, because there's only a month window where this could even be happening. And because of how different their energies are. Right. That's
right. One is on the ground and one is in the heavens.
Well, right. I mean, mythologically, like we were talking before, Uranus, right? He's his grandfather in myth, right? And being the god, the archetype of expect the unexpected, right? That's very much Uranian.
Yes.
Or just expect the unexpected. It doesn't have to be
very good. That's true. Better way. Yep.
And revolution and innovation and what's cutting edge and atypical, right?
Authentic.
But and so Jupiter expanding all of that. Jupiter expanding what is revolutionary. Jupiter expanding what's cutting edge. Jupiter expanding, and maybe chaos, right? Maybe things feel less
initially
stable.
That's true. Not to upset people here, but just to if it upsets the norm, then it seems chaotic until things kind of settle down and form a pattern again. So yes.
Well, and when we're stuck, when we're stagnant, sometimes stuff has to be shooken up.
Yes.
Right. It doesn't have to feel like we're living in a snow globe, but sometimes it feels that way. And
comfort is good, but yet, yes.
But that when we are stagnant, then stuff does need to be shaken up, because we're, as beings who are incarnated, we are here to grow, we are here to evolve. And if we're stagnant for too long, life can cease to have value, that Taurian energy, that Taurian archetype. And so needing to shake stuff up so we reconnect with our passion, so we reconnect with what's important to us. And so that maybe some of what shows up next April, May, in particular, when these two come together, and could possibly be two really interesting long-term impacts of change, of revolution, of as in part looking back of, okay, what happened the last time that these two connected in Taurus, and again, like, not that it's identical, but we can look at it thematically and see, okay,
and
events that were powerful and we're still seeing the impact today of things that happened 83 years ago.
I'm thinking, since this is really an invitation for that story, that new story of an adventure. And I'm also thinking, just as our talk that we say energy never gets destroyed, that it only gets reformed, and I'm looking at too the very fact that with this coming up in a week involves our refocus of the collective, thinking of Scorpio there, of releasing what isn't working. Here, it's another emphasis in a year with Uranus to readjust what might need new life, what might really give energy in a expansive form to revitalize things in that way. And there's so much more in this particular chart, but let's go ahead because we have some time here. Now, this is a comparative chart from the the times that Uranus, with its 84-year cycle, 83, 84, returns to connect with Jupiter and Taurus. Now, 1941 to now, but there's a significant change, I think. And it's looking with that energy of Pluto that is the consciousness of, let's shed what is no longer giving us growth. Because at that, okay, but that's not really showing. It's opposing its position exactly to the degree. Last time it was in Leo, showing our sun, of manifestation. And now next year, because this is projecting into 2024, when we're concluding this year's cycle, it's going to be in Aquarius, which it is right now as we speak, but in 2 degrees.
But it'll be at that 2 degrees. Yeah.
Exactly.
For the conjunction.
So it'll be more like, well, okay, how are we now fitting into the collective of networking, of groups, for the higher good, we could say. And also Neptune, which is another consciousness of the world, of the greater forces beyond us, is going to be exactly opposing it too. So how we're
opposing itself. So Neptune it's a Neptune opposition.
Thank you. Yes, it will be. So this conjunction, and then interestingly, at 21 degrees, it'll be what it was of our values. So maybe it'll be really reevaluating those values that we had on a whole new basis of our survival, that won't be so revolutionary in war, which we were at that time in 1941, but perhaps on a new spectrum of how we're really going to connect on that one-to-one relationships for the growth of everybody.
Yeah. Well, and I think, when I was looking at what happened in May 41, so there were 2 really big, or 3 really big events that felt like they were tied in thematically that I saw. So one, almost to the day, was the release of Citizen Kane and the film. And for people who don't know or aren't film nerds, there's a reason that even now, over 80 years later, that Citizen Kane is such a revered film, that it's considered the best film ever. Primarily because of the cinematography, and that to shoot it in the way that they did was absolutely never happened before. They literally invented cameras to get the shots that they got for this film. And it completely revolutionized cinema going forward. And so there's part of that, and the visual experience, the sensory experience of cinema being revolutionized. It was sort of on the scale of the first film ever being released, that level of cultural shift of perception,
leading edge. Yeah.
Which, and so there is part of that potential. It's like if Uranus is about invention and Jupiter comes in contact, is about that, right? This huge expansion of what's cutting edge and what's innovative.
Yes, beautiful.
Is part of that potential. Of course, the other 2 things very tied to World War II was both the beginning swearing in as prime minister of both Stalin and Churchill. Now,
incredible.
You can put the politics aside of just being conscious of their influence globally, right? Whether you agree with their political choices or not is sort of immaterial to the influence that they had on the world with the decisions that they made and the leadership that they had and the impact that we're still feeling from their leadership.
That's right? Very significant.
So, again, so it doesn't mean, we'll get another Stalin. It means we'll likely see leaders with similar long-term influence. Not necessarily the same politics, but the same longevity of influence.
Now, this chart at first seems like a lot, and I'm trying to devise a way to, when I have 3 charts on there, make it a little simpler, and the arrows help. But to focus on, I have the United States chart in the center. That is the independent chart on July 4th. And there's several, but this one is the Sibley chart that's often referred to at 5:10 in the evening in Philadelphia. And then in the middle chart is 1941, the last time of this conjunction between Jupiter in Taurus, conjunct Uranus, both occurring for this year, but when they're actually together, which was in 1941. And then next year, the 2024 conjunction. And as you can see, there's a couple of emphases tying it together for the United States. The big factor I'm going to just pull you into is the blue arrow there, because the natal chart in the United States has Chiron, which is a consciousness of where we alchemize our wounds to become, rather than just our self woe of me, to a greater purpose, to expand in service to others. And our national one is in Aries, which means, briefly, is it okay to be me? Which, when you think of the pilgrims and everybody here, they certainly left wondering that factor. And here we are still working. And it's a return, meaning that it to me, it's a very significant time of saying that we're addressing in a new fashion how to be me. And for myself, thinking about this, connecting your words of patterns and stories, perhaps we're really beginning to evolve, I would hope, into seeing how our identity can feed into a network globally, and not even globally, but with our own nation, be of support to one another. Because the other 2 factors are, we look at those 2 conjunctions that are Pluto's of transformation, or at the nodes of the United States. And in 1941, it was on our north node, which is in Leo. I'm manifesting my highest needs of manifestation. Whereas this time coming up, it's going to be on our south node. So we need to release, I would think, that area that isn't functioning about how we think of our groups. Maybe they're too elitist. Maybe we need to expand it more.
Yeah, well, I think that'll be part of the Pluto conjunct the South Node. I think it's also, I think we talked about this a little bit before, of transforming, that's where, like, maybe there's opportunities for reconciliation with the indigenous people of this continent.
Oh, yes.
Right? Because Uranus governs tribe. It also governs trauma. Right? And so what's trauma needs to be transformed. And that being part of, and maybe the piece of it happening simultaneously with the Uranus-Jupiter conjunction is coming up with the way in which the solution to dealing with this historical trauma, the generational trauma, we have to come up with something that doesn't quite exist yet. The answer to healing that is something we don't yet know, is something we don't yet understand or hasn't yet been created. And that Jupiter-Uranus particularly creating, I sort of think about with that Taurian energy, right? So what might have to be invented, literally created as a solution to this generational trauma that as a country we're navigating, right? Of how to move forward and be comfortable in our Chiron Aries identity.
Well, yes, because in that case, this is an invitation to say, let's adventure. who do I want to have on a one-to-one basis to form new stories of growth, of my purpose, of my values, of my meaningfulness. Jupiter's always wants to see the bright side of things. It's just,
yes, it's the Pollyanna, right? Sag is the Pollyanna of the zodiac. So
it feels good to feel good sometimes, right?
Yeah.
Oh, it's such a pleasure always.
Yeah, it's great. Thanks
you.
for having me again.
Always. Okay, this is Planet Buzz with Sue and Dr. Laura Tad. We'll be back again, and thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us on Talk Cosmos, the show where Sue Rose Minahan and her panel of guests connect soul growth patterns with the energetic cycles of astrology. Be sure to tune in next Sunday at 1 p.m. Pacific Time to continue your journey through the roots of the cosmic pathway.